Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cranches' Corner, where today we're here to talk about the Lakers' new defensive scheme. Fresh off a title and with some new faces on the roster and lessons learned from the playoffs, LA has made a huge change to their defense, all centered around the pick and roll. With ball screens being the most frequent NBA action, how you defend them dictates a lot for your defense. And even though the team has been pretty early in its installment of those defensive principles, we've seen this change yield promising results. Let's dig into what that change is that LA made, why they made that change, how it works, and how it's fared so far. Before we dig into the new scheme, let's refresh ourselves on the Lakers' old base pick and roll ball screen coverage. Last year, the Lakers ran a no man behind variant of drop coverage. Here's what you need to know about that coverage. As the screen is set, the screener's man should be about 2 steps below the action. Not too deep, but also not too high. The second thing is that big will retreat only as deep as they need to in order to be the man closest to the rim between them, the ball handler, and the screener. So if the ball handler continues driving downhill, they'll retreat and stay in front. If the ball handler stops around the free throw line, but the screener is rolling deeper, the big man can't let that roll man get behind them. But if there's a pick and pop and the ball handler doesn't drive all that deep, we'll see this man, even though they're in drop coverage, end up staying pretty high. The third thing is that this is a 2 versus 2 action. As you watch the 3 defenders away from the action, note how they're only worried about their man. This means we won't be seeing too many open kickout threes. The fourth thing is that the ball handler's defender will go over or under based on the ball handler's shooting ability and do all they can to get back pressure and disrupt any pull-up shots. This coverage emphasizes defending the rim and taking away kickouts while being vulnerable to pull-up scoring from the ball handler. The Lakers' new base coverage is what we'd call a catch-hedge scheme. You might also call these soft hedges or hear them called up-to-touch coverage. In this coverage, the screener's man catches the ball handler as they drive off the screen, and they're high enough that the ball handler can't get ahead of steam downhill. 2 men focused on ball means fewer scoring opportunities from that ball handler, but it does mean an open roll man, requiring help and communication from the other 3 defenders. Because this isn't a 2 versus 2 action, the help rotations and ability to scramble and recover become imperative. This is a more aggressive coverage, meaning it'll more frequently suppress the action altogether, it'll more frequently generate turnovers, but if your bigs aren't mobile, it can come with a higher risk. Now, let's break down the mechanics of a catch hedge. As the screen is set, the screener's man is 1 to 2 steps below the screen, ready to catch and contain that ball handler until the guard recovers. The ball handler's man is more focused in this scheme on recovering in front rather than getting back pressure on the ball handler. For the 3 off-ball defenders, this scheme is quite more demanding. Instead of focusing on their own man, we need the lowest help defender, meaning the one closest to the baseline, to help or what we call tag the roll man. But if I leave to tag the roll man, my man is open. This requires a second layer of help, or what we'd call helping the helper. Versus a pop, the extra help comes from the next closest perimeter player rather than the low man. This requires 5 engaged defenders actively communicating and knowing where their assignment is. Now let's look at why the Lakers have made this change. There are 3 key reasons. First, because it emphasizes LA's strength in front court mobility. Dwight and JaVale were tall and long, but less mobile anchor bigs. Perfect for drop coverage, but not mobile enough to consistently execute catch hedges. That's a big reason why we saw them sit at times in the playoffs last season. Now contrast that with the front court mainly of Harrell, AD, Markieff, Gasol, and then maybe some LeBron or Kuz mixed in. LA is collectively shorter, but more mobile. That personnel would be below average in a drop scheme, but a perfect fit for a catch hedging scheme. Second, it's a smarter type of rim protection to mitigate the step down the roster took in shot blocking and rim protection. Drop coverage with this roster would invite ball handlers to drive at you and attack at the rim. Catch hedges defend the rim by stopping the ball handler from even getting there at all. And third, this coverage is better fit for the playoffs. When just about every team has a dynamic scoring guard that can shoot off the dribble, drop coverage just won't cut it. There's a reason why we saw LA use this catch hedge scheme last playoffs in all 4 rounds, but drop very little. Why run and work on drop coverage all regular season just to abandon it in the playoffs, rather than implement one that'll translate better to the playoffs while also better optimizing the talent you have? Now that we know the what, how, and why, let's go over some of the early results. Just like last season, we'll see LA mix in other coverages based on the opponent they face. But this is the new base coverage, so expect a lot of it this year. We've actually seen LA take this to the extreme so far this season, using this coverage almost exclusively, even if it's not the best coverage to run based on the personnel they're facing. For this reason, in addition to it just being new and LA having to use new types of rotations and communication, we're seeing the Lakers take their lumps now with a focus on long-term benefit. We're also seeing defenses attack this coverage in smart, targeted ways that the Lakers have yet to implement new counters for, which will also take some time. But despite all of that, LA is second in defensive rating as of the end of games on January 6th. And compared to last year, overall shots generated by ball screens, regardless of who they're from, have resulted in a lower proportion of shots at the rim, fewer threes, and a much higher percentage of mid-range shots than before. The early results have been very promising despite it still being very new, it not being the right scheme for the teams we're playing, other teams countering it in ways we're not ready for. All of that, it's still been very positive. There's still a lot of work to do, but the sky's the limit once LA can fully implement and refine this playoff-focused, roster-optimizing defensive scheme. Tune in next time as I break down how opposing offenses are choosing to attack this scheme and what the Lakers can do to make little tweaks here and there to better defend against those already 18 different types of attacks they've faced from opposing teams.